Hello student, how are you? Assalamu alaikum. Hope all of you doing well in international trade. Today we are going to learn Heckscher Ohlin model or HO theory. Learning outcomes. After watching this video, you will be able to understand what is the HO model. The basic of the Heckscher Ohlin model. The primary work behind the HO model was a 1990 Swedish paper written by the L. Heckscher at the Stockholm School of Economics. His students Bertil Ohlin added to it in 1933. Economist Paul Samuelson expanded the original model through the articles written in 1949 and 1953. Some refer it to as the H.O. Samuelson model for this reason. Heckscher Ohlin model. The HO model is an economic theory that posits that the countries export what they can most efficiently and plentifully produces. The model emphasizes the export of goods requiring the factor of production that a country has in abundance. In this lecture, we discussed the HO theory of the international trade, which is essentially the modern theory of the comparative advantage. And like the recording theory, the HO theory explains the basis of trade between two countries by focusing on the differences in the supply conditions. Alan Heckscher and Bertil Ohlin explained the basis of the trade between the two nations on the basis of the differences in the relative factor endowment. They developed a theory that highlights the variation among the countries of supply of certain main categories for productive factors, that is the labor, capital and land, none of which is specific to any one sector. Here are some assumptions of the HO theory. The HO theory analysis is based on the number of assumptions. Number 1, 2 into 2 into 2, that is 2 countries, 2 goods and 2 factor of production. 2 countries, 2 goods and 2 factor of production mean 2 into 2 into 2 case. Identical technology. Constant returns, different factor intensities. Identical and homothetic taste and preferences. Perfect competition, perfect factor. Absence of transport cost, that is no transportation cost. No trade barriers. Strong factor abundance assumptions. Now we deeply explain all the assumptions. The assumption number 1 is 2 into 2 into 2 case mean there are 2 countries, 2 homogeneous goods and 2 homogeneous factor of production. The initial level of such factors remain fixed and are assumed to be relatively different for each country. Number 2, identical technology. Identical technology means technology is the same in both countries. This means that 2 countries have the same production function. Number 3, constant returns to scale. Production is each country takes place under condition of CRS, constant returns to scale for both the commodities. Different factor intensities. Different factor intensities. The 2 commodities have the different factor intensities, but the respective commodity intensities are the same for all factor price ratio. Identical and homothetic taste and preferences. Taste and preferences are the same in both countries. In addition, they are homothetic in nature, which means that the 2 commodities are consumed in the same relative ratio at all income levels. Number 6, perfect competition. As we already know about the perfect competition, we deeply study in the microeconomics the perfect competition and its assumptions. The perfect competition exists in the product market of both countries. Perfect factor mobility. Factors are perfectly mobile within each country, but not between countries. Absence of transportation cost. This model also assumes that there is no transportation cost, that is, there is no transport cost to produce, to transport goods and services from one country to another country. Number 9, no trade barriers. In the previous lecture, we discussed detail about the trade barriers, that is the tariff and non-tariff trade barriers. So this model assumes that there is no government restriction on the movement of the goods between countries or influence with the market determinants of the price and output. Number 10, strong factor abundance assumptions. Finally, we assume that the countries that are labor abundant, that is, that have the labor force that are large relative to their capital stocks. Remember, labor abundance mean there are two factors of production, labor and capital. In previous assumptions, we explained 2 into 2 into 2 model, that is two factor of production, labor and capital. So one country should be labor abundant, that is labor is cheaper as compared to the capital. That's mean labor abundant country will have low wages relative to the rental payments and vice versa for the capital abundant countries, and vice versa other is the capital abundant country which have the uh, excessive capital available, that is the rate of the capital is very low as compared to the labor. This is known as the Paul-Samuelson strong factor abundance assumptions. The implication of this assumption will be clear when we compare the physical definition of factor abundance with the price definition. So the two of the above assumptions are critical to the HO explanation of the basis of the trade. Assumption 1, the factor endowments or the availabilities differ between two countries, and in assumption number 4, the commodities are always intensive in the given factor regardless of relative factor price. These assumptions have to be discussed further detail. Meaning of the factor abundance. The term different factor endowment refer to different relative factor endowments, not different absolute amounts. Basic implication key assumption of 4 is that the factor proportion are difference between the two countries. Relative factor abundance may be defined in two ways: the physical definition and price definition. Now come to the HO theorem definition. From the set of assumptions about the production, it follows that the PPC production possibility frontier curve of the two countries will differ solely because their factor endowments differ. With the identical technology in both countries, that is the CRS, constant return to scale, and a given factor intensity relationship between two goods, and capital abundant country will be able to produce relative more of the capital intensive good, and the labor abundant country will be able to produce the relative to more of the labor intensive good. As we already assume that two countries, two factor of productions and two goods. Country 1, we assume that country 1 is the labor abundant and produce the labor intensive goods, and country 2 is the capital abundant and produce the capital intensive goods, because its capital in the country 2 is relatively low price as compared to the country 1. Here is the basic diagram of the HO theory: the two production possibility frontier curve and the IC curve tangent to E point and E prime point. Food and car are two goods. Figure 2, the PPC of the country 1, the capital abundant country, is skewed towards the production of the capital intensive goods, car. The PPC of the country 2, the labor abundant country, is skewed toward the labor intensive good, food. Country 1 produces and consume at point E, and country 2 at point E prime. Their production and the consumption points are the same under the autarky, that is, when there is no trade. Although demand conditions are the same, their assumption level differ due to the differences in the production levels caused by the differing factors endowments. Thank you so much.